The shuttle approached the large anchorage station slowly without issue. Wyatt had been contacted by the station a few minutes ago, giving him a vector trail to their destination, the Noir Navio. Watching through the monitor's screen, the pilot couldn't help but feel awestruck again upon seeing the marvelous black ship. The hull was almost entirely dark, its surface reflecting the light from the station and the distant star rather dimly. He could still remember vividly what it felt like to command that vessel. It had been an otherworldly experience that was overshadowed by the pure pleasure he felt when the Drazen cruiser was destroyed. The spear-tip-shaped vessel was, again, marvelous to behold. Ever since capturing the ship and taking it away from Caiston hands, his time had been consumed by training, adapting, and more than he would have liked to spend in a medical bay one way or another. In fact, he was starting to grow a not-so-insignificant amount of distaste for medical procedures that kept him bound, though he understood their necessity. But now he could admire the ship more closely. The design was elegant and organic with no room for fanciful aesthetics. It was purely functional, though such simplicity made it beautiful to his eyes. The two short wings, compared to the length of the vessel, that is, that sprung near its rear, served no practical purpose other than to house more compartments, aiding the structural design of the ship that had allowed him to use its mobility in his favor during the battle against the Drazen. For a destroyer class, it was on the average size of one as it measured 1,832 meters in length, a kilometer in width if measured from wing to wing, and a mere 200 at the tip due to the demands of the spinal-mounted pulse beam. Similarly, in height, the situation repeated itself but nowhere near as pronounced with the ship 442 meters at its thickest, central point that housed within the powerful tri-reactor plasma core. Over the length of the vessel, the gradual smoothing was less evident and also ended on the tip, making a perfect 200-meter-in-diameter cylinder ready to spew its deadly charge. While some could see the ship as bulky or unappealing in design, he personally couldn't see a more perfect ship. Not only was it a technological marvel, especially when compared to the standards set in the Principality, but it was made to strike from the shadows with deadly force and sweep back into the hiding for another run. When I commanded it, I felt like I was one with the ship. It felt like when I'm inside the cockpit of a fighter, but more intense. I could almost feel it move with every command I issued, every turn, every acceleration and deceleration, the power when firing the pulse beam. Everything was so otherworldly. Is that what being a Commodore, Captain, and above feels like? To sit on that chair and be one with the ship? If so, then I envy Commander Redford and Admiral Damien, to be able to enjoy the vastness of space from that perspective all the time. Yes, I envy such a position, Wyatt thought to himself, smiling gently at the Noir Navio. Look at it, so pristine and black, like polished obsidian, a black shimmering pearl set against the blackness of space. Wyatt paused for a moment, and his smile faded slowly. You commanded it through Cynthia's clever use of a loophole in a dire situation, Wyatt. You killed Drazen, you saved people's lives, and Clara was safe. Let that be enough. To experience such a thing as a commoner is more than I ever could have hoped for. Let that be enough. Even if I'm not a commoner anymore, that doesn't change what I am, he thought, content with the resolution even if it wasn't satisfying. Beautiful ship, isn't it? Clara's voice cut through the silence, and Wyatt turned his attention to her. Oh, that didn't startle you? You were so focused on the screen that I thought you'd at least jump a little. It seems I'll have to try harder, said the princess with a serene smile on her lips. Your sense of humor is peculiar, Clara, Wyatt replied. So says the man that's a stick in the mud, Cynthia added with a playful smirk. Do you see me as a means to measure the depth of muddy terrain? Wyatt asked, genuinely confused at her choice of words. No, that's not what, Cynthia replied in puzzlement while Clara let out a short, undignified snort. No, Wyatt, a stick in the mud is a phrase used to describe a person with a dull or boorish personality. Wyatt shrugged. Weskel would agree with you. He always said that I didn't know how to have fun. Be that as it may, Wyatt, what were you pondering about so intently? Clara asked with interest. Wyatt turned to the screen before replying. I was just admiring the Noir Navio. I've caught glimpses of it, but I never had the chance to observe it in detail. It has also occurred to me that I've only traveled between 3 different decks. There's still so much to see of it. He paused, taking a second to admire the ship on his screen. You're right, Clara, it is a beautiful ship. Deadly, too. You should know, Cynthia pointed out, her tone serious. Whoever built it managed to compact the firepower of a battlecruiser and the utilities of a battleship to the size of a destroyer. According to our own measurements, it is an assault destroyer, but no other assault destroyer across the Principality could come close to match it. Speed, armor, shields, durability, power, versatility. Even the exalted virtue would be hard-pressed to match it in an even fight following the rules of engagement. But the Nornavio is not built for them. Silent, decapitating strikes are what this ship was built for, but it isn't defenseless either if it must take action outside its intended role, Clara listed, her tone switching to her colder, more calculative side. This boogeyman hull plating is also intriguing. It may be fragile, but its stealth capabilities vastly outstrip any potential armor grading it could be placed in its stead. The blonde woman unhooked her safety belt and moved closer to Wyatt, standing next to him as she pointed a finger at the rear of the Nornavio. See those edges that mask the engines? Those are there to hide the plume as long as we're not moving too fast or too close to a target. That aside, Wyatt, can you see the radiators anywhere? What is she playing at? Wyatt thought to himself a moment before answering. They're located on the bottom of the ship, but remain locked away unless needed, correct? And why is that? Clara pressed on. Because the boogeyman system radiates excess heat slowly but constantly all the time. It works similarly to how many other types of hulls deal with excess heat, but it does it better and without giving itself to regular sensors. Unless the ship is engaging in an active fight causing the heat levels to accumulate faster than what the hull can radiate off, Wyatt replied, then pondered for a second with a brief hum. Does the ship have heat sinks? When I read the specifications of the Nornavio, I didn't read anything related to heat sinks. There are heat sinks located across the warp drive, the reactor, the weaponry, and the pulse beam cannon. The Nornavio can run very, very hot. Enough to burn everyone in it if a conflict runs for too long. The heat sinks will absorb some of it, but it will eventually overheat under the command of a reckless captain, Clara explained. Which, if you are willing, Wyatt, could you tell me what were you going to do if you hadn't passed out during the assault against the Drazen? Clara makes a good point, and I must confess that I, too, am curious to know what were you planning to do, Wyatt, Cynthia added. Wyatt felt a thrilling wave of tingling pleasure at being reminded of the incident once again. Even if he never got to face Drazen ever again, that battle and the experiences he gained from it were etched into his memory for the rest of his life. With pleasure, he began, his voice reflecting his good mood. After the cruiser was destroyed, I planned on peeling away from them and getting at least one of their remaining destroyed to get near us before entering weapons range. I would then put the Nornavio into a slow spin and engage the enemy with railgun and plasma fire. Once the shields were down, use the heavy laser turrets to strike their center and hopefully destroy their bridge deck. After that, I don't know what I would have done or how I would have reacted to their counter-assaults. Everything was happening so fast, so I just did what came naturally to me. I'm certain that's true, Wyatt. You are not the kind of man to formulate convoluted strategies, at least not outside the thick of combat, and you showed them no mercy. I'm certain you would have gone after them when they made their move to escape the system, Cynthia pointed out. Most likely, yes, Wyatt agreed. There was no point in denying that, if given the chance, he would have made sure every single last Drazen on Gintrax would burn in a fire. As his mind went back to that momentous occasion, he remembered other pieces of information. After a moment of silence, he turned to Clara. Clara, may I ask you something? You may. I've been thinking about it after I got my implant since I didn't have much else to do. Since we were heading to Finnegan territory, why did you barter for Uriel Hoax's ships? Facing another Caiston force was a possibility, but even so, highly unlikely. His Majesty the Prince, your brother, now has access to greater forces. Was it part of your plan? Will the destroyers and freighters you gained form part of your fleet? He asked, and was confused when Clara let out an amused giggle before placing a hand on his shoulder. My dear Wyatt, those ships were never my goal. Woodshaft was the prize I was after. The personnel we gathered up along the way was part of what I was striving to achieve. Frankly, I am still disappointed that I have no real fighting ground and boarding forces. In their favor, though, the leader of the mercenaries under my command, one Commander Francesco Arcadi, is a rather enthusiastic and competent man. I'm sure his forces will prove their worth." The princess replied, and Wyatt smiled internally, noting the not-so-enthusiastic tone behind the otherwise encouraging words of the blonde, purple-eyed woman. "Then, if Woodshaft was your goal, why deal for the ships at all? Diplomacy and negotiations are dangerous battlefields, Wyatt. I did not lie to Uriel when I said I could have easily replaced him. Had he shown incompetence or overt greed, I would have ordered his execution. But Uriel Holks is an intelligent and competent man. The ships bartered will be used as refitted transports and be integrated into the forces of the fleets present as logistical and support ships. Deities know we need capable ships to press against my uncle's forces," Clara explained, pausing for a moment, her eyes gleaming with intent before continuing. "You see, Wyatt, my goal was to achieve Woodshaft primarily as a distraction. The station is vast and a strategic position for both House Finnegan and Caiston. Now that they are not a mere smuggler den but a commercial hub under the recognition of House Astor, the only way for House Caiston to reclaim it for themselves will be through a large military force or with the use of Third Fleet elements. But Cornelius Tigan won't be able to spare his forces whilst in conflict with Finnegan and other loyalist forces." Letting go of his shoulder, she returned to her seat as they approached their destination. "And while Woodshaft stands, we have eyes inside Caiston territory and a potential staging point for our forces if need be." Did she plan all of it from the start? Wyatt thought as a shudder of fear and not a small amount of respect and admiration flowed through him. Making future plans was decidedly not one of his strengths, but Clara was capable of formulating a dozen different plans with laughable ease. "Is she a genius because she's an Astor, or is it her natural talent?" he asked himself, not sure which answer was more terrifying. Sad as it was, the Drazen assault cemented Uriel Hoax's opinion and gained us his appreciation, if not his loyalty, Cynthia added pragmatically. "Tragically," Wyatt replied, agreeing with the blue-haired woman. "Say, Wyatt, aren't you curious about what happened to Salazar Reed?" Cynthia asked with a knowing tone. "Not really," the pilot replied without hesitation. "Unless his name is Serhan Gimor, I don't hold grudges without merit. What he did was no different from what I expect from petulant blue bloods." "What he did was almost worthy of praise were it not for his intended goals," Clara exclaimed, and a cold laugh escaped her lips. "Using his knowledge against you, he sent you a peace gauntlet hoping you'd reject the gesture. Since he couldn't kill you for your crime, he opted to show he was better than you." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Sadly for him, he fell short of his own expectations and ended up humiliated in turn." Vice Admiral Vashakati Reed was not pleased with the actions of his nephew, Cynthia continued with a smirk. "He didn't send a formal apology. He has to save face somehow for the sake of his house. But he stripped Salazar from his noble title, reducing him to a mere knight with no authority within his house. He was lucky he wasn't exiled for his actions and his defeat. To make matters worse for him, my sister was not gentle either." Wyatt winced at the sadistic tone Cynthia's tone took during that last sentence. He didn't know Commander Juliana anywhere near as well as Cynthia, but he knew she was a woman of unquestionable loyalty and valued it above all else. "What did she do to him?" he asked as his curiosity won. "After receiving 20 public lashings, she demoted him from captain to sergeant. Marine ranks work in a different system than Royal Navy ones, but effectively, he won't be able to command anything but auxilia forces ever again. His reputation has been ruined, his standing crushed, and those close to him have abandoned him. In a rather cruel decision, even by the standards set by my sister, she has transferred him to the Noir Navio." "Isn't that dangerous? What if he tries to hurt you or Clara? What if he turns traitor?" Wyatt asked, worried. "He has no option but to lower his head and take his punishment. Vashakati made it clear that if he heard any further offense caused by Salazar, he would be stricken from the family records, made pariah, and likely killed or exiled in full disgrace. House Reed can be brutish, but they are loyal to the prince," Cynthia clarified. "To a noble of a storied house such as House Reed, there is no greater punishment and threat. He'll likely seek an honorable death in combat before the thought of betrayal crosses his mind." "If you say so, I shall trust you, Cynthia," Wyatt replied sincerely. She was the experienced noble of the two, after all. His attention turned to the monitor as the computer signaled that the docking procedure was about to commence. He watched as the hangar of the Noir Navio opened in the distance, illuminating the otherwise black exterior with the blue hue of a kinetic shield. A request for communication came through, and a second later he accepted it. "This is Communications and Navigational Officer Galt Tyrone. Proceed to the hangar's Section A Shuttle NTS-001, over." "Officer Galt Tyrone, this is Shuttle NTS-001. I read you loud and clear. Proceeding to your directions, over," Wyatt replied, glad to hear the voice of the red-haired man. I still need to thank him for helping me. What do you even give a noble as a gift?" "Understood, Shuttle NTS-001. We await the arrival of Her Majesty with great anticipation, over and out," Galt said before ending the connection. "I'm glad that you countermanded my orders in that last moment, Wyatt. Galt Tyrone has proven himself to be reliable and a good bridge officer. He had to be demoted, but I believe he prefers it. The rest of the crew have also saved me the headache of finding competent bridge personnel. Small blessings truly are a joy when they arrive at your side, don't they?" Clara said with a barely perceptible smile. "How does she keep doing that? It's like she can read my mind, but I've never heard of something like that before. Not even in the most outlandish rants Mr. Warlow went on and on when he was drunk," Wyatt thought, and glanced at Clara, who in turn didn't do anything to indicate that she could do anything of the sort. Choosing to blame his imagination, he focused on the task at hand as they approached the Noir Navio, the ship growing in size as they approached until even the hangar bay overtook the view of his primary cameras. The moment they passed through the kinetic shield, the bay began to close while he landed on the spot two Econtis were using guiding batons. The shuttle landed softly, and with a dying rumbling from the engines, the trip ended. Two large mechanical arms secured the shuttle in place as the trio put on their helmets and waited until the hangar was pressurized once again. With a loud ping, Wyatt moved to the door and opened it, stepping aside to let Cynthia step out first, followed by Clara, aided by her best friend. Finally, Wyatt followed, and they were soon joined by Captain Milcades, taking his spot next to Cynthia. He was not at all surprised to see 4 Royal Marines stationed close to the shuttle, waiting in their silent, vigilant way. "I'm glad to be back aboard a ship," Wyatt commented, relieved. The hangar was fairly empty, with only a few technicians, staff members, and engineers going about fully suited running diagnostics on the available shuttles, drones, and fighters. Now the question was, what was he to do now? The Noir Navio wouldn't leave until several hours later. He wasn't tired, so sleeping was not an option. He was feeling hungrier than usual, though, but it wasn't mealtime yet, and he had no desire to train until they were on their way out. So unless Redford or Clara ordered him to do something, he had nothing to do. "There you are!" The translated voice of a certain Yakanti rang through his channel, and he turned to his left, seeing Jincho approaching with vivid enthusiasm. "I've been looking everywhere for you, worm-brain. Come, you have to see your fighter." Suddenly he turned to Clara. "Princess, I'm taking the worm-brained maniac to see his fighter. Glad to see you back, though. Now get moving, maniac." With that said, he turned around and made his way off without waiting for an answer. Did he hack my communicator?" Clara's voice was heard through an open channel. "He hacked us all, my princess," Milcades replied dryly, but there was an edge of respect in his voice. "I didn't detect his intrusion until it was done. Impressive." "Should I reprimand him, my princess?" Cynthia asked, unmoved. "Certainly not. He's even better than what I expected. Such talent shows immense potential. I wonder why he was in Woodshaft in the first place with such talent at his disposal," the princess pondered. "His attitude leaves much to be desired," Cynthia commented. "True. Regardless, I think I like him. He shows not even an ounce of respect, but he's not malicious either. Yes, I believe I will come to like this rambunctious Yakanti," Clara said in a playful tone. For his part, Wyatt could almost feel Cynthia roll her eyes, and for some reason he was sure Captain Milcades was trying not to chuckle. "Wyatt, why are you still here? Aren't you going to see your fighter?" she asked in that same tone. "As you command, my princess," Wyatt replied, defeated but content. Giving the blonde princess a short-lived salute, he moved to follow the now distant Yakanti. When he caught up to him, he glanced back to see his friends leave, escorted by the Royal Marines. Friends. It still feels so odd to say that, like a bad rash that doesn't go away no matter how much you scratch it. But in a good way, Mom is never going to believe I befriended a princess and a lady of House Winfield. Dad's probably going to faint. Wham is never going to let me forget it. And Weskel is probably going to be a pain about it. The pilot thought of his family's potential reaction, earning a warm, wide smile underneath his helmet. When he caught up with Jincho, they were near a fighter that, true to Jincho's boasting, looked as good as new. Had to replace entire systems. The right wing was torn asunder. How it didn't shear off during your crazy maneuvers, I still don't know. Electrical was blown. You somehow managed to turn your heat sinks into scrap, but everything else was working, Jincho said as he nodded in approval and his tail swayed contently behind him. Got a chance to tinker with it, too. Managed to recalibrate the fuel and thrust systems and reroute excess stress and heat away from the core and into the engines. And your directional thrusters are also better now. Your fighter is now 7.2% faster than before. You can carry half as much coil gun ammunition, and your shields are a whooping 3% stronger now. Had to sacrifice redundant systems, but hey, who cares, right? So, Wormbrain, how do you like your new fighter? You may thank me now. Wyatt smiled widely. Does anyone know what you did to it yet? He asked, barely able to keep the tremor in his voice at bay. If I did, they wouldn't have let me tinker with that beauty of a fighter. Principality regulations can be so anal about it, I'd rather choke on my feathers than deal with that shit. But you, Wormbrain, you know your stuff. I can't see your eyes, but I know you like what you see, eh? Fighting fair is for losers and soon-to-be corpses, Jincho said, extremely proud of himself. More than ever before, Wyatt decided he would stay in Jincho's good graces. Dropping to a knee, he bowed before the surprised Ikanti. Thank you, Master Technician Jincho. I am most impressed and grateful for your work, he said solemnly, putting as much theatrics into his praise as possible. Jincho shuddered, and if it were not for the suit, his feathers and fur would be standing at attention at the compliment. Ha! See, you ungrateful bastards! A little recognition and praise go a long way to get what I can give, Jincho shouted as he threw a fist in the air. Clara has to know this. I'm certain she'll be happy, Wyatt thought. Wyatt landed on the ground with a resounding thud, his face pressed against the mat while he heaved for breath. Above him, Cynthia stood waiting for him to get to his feet. Again, Cynthia said, her tone unflinching as always during their training sessions. The now heterochromatic-eyed pilot groaned as he obeyed the command of the blue-haired woman. Shaking his head, he adopted a low-guard stance with his fists in front of him. Cynthia raised an eyebrow in response. Brute force has never worked before, she pointed out plainly. I know, Wyatt replied, and a chuckle caught his attention. Peering to the right, he found none other than Nultar Olkara as he wiped the sweat from his brow. He gave him a friendly wave as he watched from a safe distance what had become a regular scene for anyone visiting the gymnasium to admire. Namely speaking, watch Cynthia Winfield beat him down relentlessly over and over again. Though, as much as it pained him to admit, he could now see a purpose to the torture she called a training. They had just left Finnegan territory after 2 weeks of silent, rapid travel. The Nornavio showcased her speed, cutting off several days now that she was alone. Over the course of those 2 weeks, he had come back to his routine, and while his squad mates were surprised by his new eye colors, it didn't cause any altercations. In a rather odd turn of events, thanks to the events during the procession and the following banquet, he started to pay more attention to his surroundings. He caught things he had never bothered to pick up on before, mostly coming from noble women regardless of their rank and station. There were furtive glances thrown his way, whispers followed by sly, predatory smirks. The way they would sway their hips as they sauntered whenever he was close. The necessary adjust to their uniforms, especially across their most prominent feminine features. All in an attempt to gain his attention somehow. Romantic and sexual relationships were never something he craved, much less found interest in, but he'd be lying if he didn't find the sudden attention thrown his way somewhat jarring, and the appeal was, well, hard to ignore. But much like the red-dressed woman at the banquet, he knew their intentions were selfish and catered to their own interests, so he paid them no more attention than a single glance. Apparently, rumors spread about his uninterest, and some noblemen flexed their muscles in the gymnasium or gave him similar furtive glances. He wouldn't judge anyone for their sexual attraction, but he was attracted to women, not men. Thus, he made his best attempt to ignore those noblemen completely. Lastly, some commoner staff women had also tried to entice him with far less success than the noble women. It had been just 2 weeks so far of dealing with that particular problem, and he was already tired of it. But despite their best distant, non-verbal efforts, not a single one had approached him with words, which was odd to say the least. He could understand the commoners since he was sure they were afraid of him, but the noble women? Either they were taking their time, measuring their possibilities, or something else was keeping them at bay. Whatever was the case, Wyatt couldn't be more thankful for it. Like a fool, he would have certainly fallen for one of their tricks and temptations without the advice from his friends and the experience gained. Taking a deep breath, he shoved those thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. He relaxed his muscles before tensing them and relaxing them once more, enjoying the warmth it produced, before lunging forth. Readapting to his new strength had been an easy task after a couple of days of intense training. Cynthia even showed him some mercy by not engaging him in combat until he was in full control of his body. After that, their training resumed, and just like she'd promised, his training escalated with new exercises, even more merciless training combat, and worst of all, her guidance only came sporadically. With a heavy exhale, he lunged forth, trying to punch Cynthia's stomach. She easily dodged it, but he'd been expecting it. Before his momentum ended, he used his right talon as a pivot to deliver a spinning kick that Cynthia blocked with one hand. With his ankle firmly in her grasp, he flopped to the ground before she could do anything to him. Her eyes widened in surprise before he used his free leg to sweep at her legs. To his dismay, she merely jumped, evading his attempt. But instead of the expected pain that followed a failure, she let go of his ankle and took a step back, nodding in approval. "Good. That was good, Wyatt. You switched between styles quickly and unexpectedly. Against many other fighters, it would have worked. And that kick? You've adapted well to your implants and enhancements." Her praise ended, and a smirk replaced her otherwise serious and stern expression. "You didn't hold back." "You told me not to hold back," Wyatt replied as he stood up. "Remember that if you're ever faced against women in a real fight, you can't hold back, Wyatt," Cynthia pressed on. "Why would I hold back just because they're a woman? If they're my enemy, they're my enemy. Simple as," he replied in full honesty. It was true after all. If he was facing an enemy trying to kill him, he cared not if they were a man, a woman, or an alien. Pleased with his answer, Cynthia's smile widened slightly. "Most excellent. Now prepare yourself, Wyatt, for I shall be the one coming at you next." Wyatt felt his entire body go rigid upon hearing those words. He took a solid defensive stance, crouching slightly with his right leg behind for extra support. Meanwhile, Cynthia didn't bother to take any stance at all. She only hopped 3 times and cracked her neck. The sound made every bystander wince. They shared gazes for what felt like an eternity, until Wyatt, sweating nervously and with a dry throat, nodded. In the blink of an eye, Cynthia, who was at least 3 meters apart, closed the distance before he could react to her. Instinctively, Wyatt threw an uppercut that the blue-haired woman dodged with casual ease. A moment later, a fist collided with his stomach, dropping him to his knees as he embraced his stomach in pain. Looking up at the red-armored woman, he was met with another approving nod. "That will do for today, Wyatt. Refresh yourself and then go to Milkady's. He'll be waiting for you in the firing range. Tomorrow I shall find out how good you can be with a sword," Cynthia commanded before walking past him. Wyatt remained in his spot as breathing proved to be a monumental task at the moment. A few seconds later, a hand landed on his right shoulder. He turned to find Noltar offering him a helping hand. Taking it, his squadmate helped him stand up on shaky legs. "You okay there, Wyatt?" the slightly green-haired man asked with a mix of worry and amusement. "I'll be," Wyatt replied, coughing at the end. "The floor has become my most intimate relationship, wouldn't you agree?" Noltar chuckled. "Maybe so. Come, Lieutenant, how about I escort you to your quarters?" "That would be welcomed. Lady Cynthia has been rather energetic as of late. That is to say, she's not showing me any mercy whatsoever. I wonder how long it'll take before she breaks a bone," he thought to himself as he began to walk next to Noltar, albeit with some difficulty as the disorientation and pain were still running rampant in his body. Once they were out of the gymnasium and walking through the mostly empty hallways, Nultar cleared his throat. "Has she broken anything yet?" Nultar asked, unknowingly mirroring Wyatt's thoughts. "Not yet," Wyatt replied. "That punch looked like it hurt," Nultar pointed out with a chuckle. "She was so fast. I still can't believe a human can move that quickly despite seeing it with my own eyes. Or should I say that I didn't see her move? One moment she was there, the next she had her fist in your stomach." "I know what you mean, Nultar. I barely had time to react after she moved," Wyatt said, hiding the thrilling fear and respect he felt for Cynthia at that moment. "Yeah, and I fear that she wasn't even serious about it. Regardless, you are incredibly fortunate. A bloody Winfield is training you. My great-grandfather received training from a Winfield, and in his diary, he always mentioned that what he learned from that training saved his life many times. He showed nothing but respect toward them. I can see why. She's not only beautiful, but dangerous, too. She wouldn't be a Winfield otherwise, huh?" Wyatt turned his gaze to the grinning man and raised an eyebrow. "You seem to know much about House Winfield, Nultar." The gray-eyed pilot shrugged. "Not really. I only know them through memoirs, historical records, reputation, and sheer proximity. House Okara was a banner house under the rule of House Calidor, same as House Reed. We bordered the territory of House Winfield, so their exploits reached us fairly quickly. I remember now, you showed particular distaste toward House Reed. If you don't mind me asking, how did your family die?" Wyatt asked in an understanding, cordial tone. "Who said anything about my family being dead?" Nultar chuckled somberly. "Although that's a gentler fate than what we are going through." "Oh, I see. Please forgive me, Nultar. I simply assumed your family was killed or something of the like," the black-haired pilot apologized. Nultar shrugged again. "You didn't know. Can't say I can blame you for that, Lieutenant. Though, if I may ask, why did you assume that was the case as your first choice?" "Noble houses in Volantis have fights all the time. All of the smaller houses are bidding for power and the attention of House Arante, who, in turn, would do almost anything to please House Gimor and keep their position as the governing house of Volantis. Assassinations are rare, but do happen every so often," Wyatt explained. "I always heard that things were rough on the more underdeveloped systems and planets, but nothing quite like that," said Nultar. "I was born on Jissi. The conflict between noble houses there deals more with honor, standing, and reputation. Same could be said across the entirety of Calidor territory." He paused, his gaze set to nothing for a second or two before he shrugged. "Not that it matters anymore. Not me, at least. He's a fallen noble now, I remember. That does explain his reckless behavior during our training sessions and his near-suicidal approach to danger," Wyatt thought grimly. He never paid it much attention, but according to the gossip back at the academy, the worst fate a noble could suffer was to be exiled. But for a whole house, becoming a fallen house was a death sentence in all but name. "Is that why you joined the Royal Navy? To seek out a life for yourself?" Wyatt asked. "Partially. I was originally going to join the Marines, but the fall of my house ended such prospects. Fortunately for me, being a pilot suited me just fine," Nultar replied, his usual laid-back, cheerful tone replaced by an air of somber resignation. "What is it like, Nultar, to fall? Now that I'm a noble with a nascent house, there are many things I should start to worry about. Lady Cynthia and Princess Clara have been giving me small pointers and lessons, but a more grounded opinion would suit me well," Wyatt asked, not wanting to sound insulting or give Nultar the idea that he wanted to learn from his misfortune alone. "You have a way with words, Lieutenant. Has anyone ever told you that?" Nultar replied with a soft, empty chuckle. "The downfall of House Okara was orchestrated by House Reed. I've made no attempts to hide my distaste for that accursed name." He paused for a moment before offering his squad leader a polite, sincere smile. "That reminds me, Lieutenant. I think my eyes have been playing tricks on me, but I swear I've seen Salazar Reed a couple of times in passing. Do you know anything about it? That is, if you can tell me at all." Wyatt pondered for a moment before answering. "First tell me what House Reed did to yours, and I'll consider telling you." Of course, he planned on telling him regardless. The situation wasn't the same, but he could sympathize to an extent with his most veteran squad mate. "There's nothing much to tell, Lieutenant. Despite our houses sharing a minor house status, House Reed is far more powerful, wealthy, and influential. House Olcara made the grave mistake of overreaching, and an immensely lucrative business deal carried by my father took a significant amount of credits away from Reed coffers, moving them to our own. House Reed took it as an insult, and they began to move against us. This all happened when I was just a child. By the time they were done with us, every commercial deal and position of importance we had was taken away from us in disgrace and shame. As a result, every partner and loyal friend we had abandoned us. We were no longer invited to events, parties, or meetings. We were made to be pariahs. And by the time I entered the academy, House Olcara had fallen, Noltar explained with a neutral, detached tone. Don't misunderstand me, though, Wyatt. My family is hardly struggling. We have credits, lands, and properties. But being cut off from social gatherings of importance and blocked from making worthwhile, significant deals, be they industrial, agricultural, social, commercial, or whatever else, is a death sentence. House Olcara will continue to exist for a generation or two more, maybe 3. But not a single proposal of marriage or union will come our way, nor will it be accepted. House Olcara is dead, and only something extraordinary could undo the damage House Reed did to us, Noltar said sternly. Do you hate House Reed? Wyatt asked, now understanding Noltar's fatalistic tendencies. Of course I do, but not for the reason you may think, Noltar replied. My father snubbed them badly. He deserved to be humbled, but said humbling affected our entire house. We paid for that insult 1,000-fold. House Reed wasn't content with just making us lose the same amount of credits my father took from them. We lost our reputation, made to look like incompetent fools, cheats, and dishonest backstabbers in broad daylight. No, they were in their right to act against my entire family and house. It is the disproportionate response for which I hate them. If a Reed dies, I won't shed any tears. If they suffer, I will laugh. I have nothing left to lose as it is. I see. Thank you, Noltar. Now, would you like to know why Salazar is here? Wyatt asked with a mischievous smirk. Just like that, the melancholic aura surrounding Noltar evaporated and his smile returned. By the time they reached his quarters, Wyatt finished his tale. From Salazar's attempt to humiliate him in front of everyone, the duel, the result of said duel, to which Noltar laughed for an entire minute until he cried, and then his punishment. That caused Noltar to nearly fall to the ground, clutching his stomach due to how hard he was laughing. His laughter was infectious, though Wyatt lacked the same enjoyment Noltar was experiencing. Pleasantries were exchanged, and soon after Noltar left, making his way to the Joint Noble Crew Barracks to tend to his necessities. After a quick shower, Wyatt put on a fresh uniform when he heard the voice of Clara in his mind. Wyatt, your training with Milcades has been postponed. I need you on the bridge as fast as you can, ordered the princess. Instantly, he left his quarters and made his way to the bridge, wondering what had happened. When he reached the bridge's doors guarded by 2 Royal Marines, the duo let him pass without question and entered the familiar room. Commander Redford stood next to the captain's chair with Cynthia and Captain Milcades also present. He recognized Galt Tirome sitting on one of the stations, and the rest of the bridge crew were busy carrying out their duties. Clara sat on the captain's chair, wearing not her armor but rather something he'd never seen her wear before. A mix between a uniform colored in hues of purple, blue, and black and a pilot's armor. It lacked the reinforced armor but offered more mobility in return, though he suspected she was wearing more for comfort than for style. Nevertheless, the screen hanging from the ceiling caught his attention the most. On it, the image of what could charitably be called a ship was on screen, floating in space, trapped in the orbit of a small, rocky planetoid. He stepped closer to Clara, joining Cynthia, Milcades, and Redford, breaking the silence. As you've requested, I'm here, my princess. If I may ask, what kind of ship is that? According to the readings, that's an old freighter retrofitted to serve as a live ship of sorts, Redford answered, his eyes never leaving the monitor. It has 4 standard laser turrets, 2 anti-asteroid cannons, and 6 PD turrets. Better armed than regular freighters. The heat signatures indicate that the ship is powered, but its reactor is at minimum capacity. Wyatt didn't need more information to arrive at the conclusion everyone else had already achieved. He was looking at a pirate vessel. Galt? Clara asked, her tone firm. Processing the information, my princess. We're not picking any signals coming from or being received by the ship. They're completely silent, Galt replied. So they're not acting as a relay station or planning to make an assault? Relevant information about the system? Clara asked, eyes narrowing. Aside from mining operations on the asteroid belts, the icy planets with their water harvesting, and the helium harvester on the system's single-gas giant, nothing of worth can be found here, my princess, replied the red-haired man a second later. If I may be so bold to say, perhaps these pirates are performing repairs? I agree with his observation, my princess. A lone pirate ship wouldn't be able to do much on its own even here, Redford added. Unless, of course, this pirate scum is desperate enough to strike by its lonesome. The question remains, what are we to do with it? Clara said, ending with a deep hum. I need your opinions on what is to be done. Redford? Destroy them. Let it stain the principality no longer, came the veteran's reply, short but brutal. Cynthia? Capture their leader. Find out what he knows. A simple reply, and to the point, was ushered by the blue-haired woman, Captain Milcades? We should send a boarding team, my princess. We must know why they are here and their intentions. For all we know, this could be the staging point for an assault by a large pirate group or, worse, an entire syndicate. The stoic, cold, and firm voice of Captain Milcades came next. Wyatt? Wyatt was taken aback for a moment at the mention of his name, but the surprise passed quickly as he gave his answer, short and decisive. Blow them up. Galt? My princess? Galt asked, confused and surprised at the mention of his name. I have no right to give you any sort of advice, my princess. Save your delusional pleasantries, Galt. Your princess and captain has requested your input. Now give it to me. Your prior experience dealing with pirates may prove useful, Clara ordered, without even looking at the red-haired man. The entire bridge felt tense for a few seconds until Galt swallowed and gave his answer. We have the element of surprise, my princess. Destroying them would be as easy as deploying a boarding action. Boarding them to learn their intentions sounds to be the more reasonable option. Clara didn't say anything for what felt like ages after Galt gave his input. Finally, she spoke with a heavy, commanding tone that made everyone understand her orders would be carried out without fail. Board the ship. Capture their leaders alive and unharmed. Wyatt, I want your squadron to move in and plant a haywire mine to disable them. Captain Milcades, I need you and 2 other Royal Marines to oversee and command our boarding forces. I'll dispatch Francesco Arcadi and some of his forces as well. Understood, my princess, Milcades replied, turning to leave and carry out his orders without question. As you command, my princess, Wyatt said shortly after. Are we to join the boarding forces? No. After you disable the ship, I want you and your squadron to remain vigilant and explore the planetoid's surface in search of a base of operations, Clara replied in that same tone. My princess, Wyatt repeated, and gave a salute before leaving to carry out his orders. Unless the pirates were somehow preparing a trap, he wouldn't see any real combat at all. That suited him just fine. Pirate retrofitted freighter. Milcades, Royal Marine Captain, watched through a live video feed as the pirate freighter lost the few lights it had across its hull as the haywire mine did its work. It had been decided that the boarding parties wouldn't use their precious few boarding pods. They could repair them thanks to the abundance of supplies and the fabricator the Noir Navio was equipped with. But Princess Clara decided that they would instead use shuttles and board the ship through its cargo bays. With any luck, the sudden loss of power would indicate the pirates to suit up as a boarding action was likely to happen soon. That meant more prisoners to interrogate. If not, no one would miss a pirate. In his visor's tactical feed, he watched Wyatt Staples' squadron, the Composters, move away from the vessel and down to the planetoid looking for a hidden pirate base. Meanwhile, the 3 shuttles carrying several Marines and their auxilia forces, plus the mercenaries, moved as one quickly through space, approaching the now crippled freighter. The shuttles decelerated and landed on the freighter's hull after a few minutes. The doors opened and the boarding forces moved out carefully, their magnetic boots keeping them grounded to the ship's hull. Their targeted cargo bay was punctured by a hull-cutting laser drone. A 5-meter diameter metal circle was launched into space, followed by the trapped atmosphere inside the cargo bay, expelling trash and boxes into open space, but no bodies. When the flow finally stopped, he and his two fellow Royal Marines were the first to invade the pirate vessel, weapons at the ready. To his surprise, the cargo bay was devoid of people. "Move in," he ordered at the same time he and his companions rushed to where the bridge was located, hoping to capture the pirate leader there. Behind him, several dozen auxilia forces entered the ship first, then followed by their marine leaders. The mercenaries, led by their self-proclaimed commander Francesco Arcadi, also followed suit and moved to carry out their orders, heading in the opposite direction. The gaping entry hole was quickly sealed by auxilia forces using sealing foam moments before doors were breached and pressurization occurred. Once it stopped, Milcades continued on his way and did not take long to find the first signs of resistance. Measuring his enemy took only a moment, and he felt disgust toward them. Calling their equipment lackluster would be generous. Most of it was patched, refitted, and repaired so many times it was a wonder it still worked at all. And their weaponry? Even by pirate standards, they were little more than glorified, poorly patched-together stolen weapons that would jam half the time. However, what truly disgusted him was that the pirates he was facing couldn't be past 16. Were their superiors so cowardly that they would their young first? The pirates opened fire, but most of their weapons either stopped working after a few shots, or they ran out of ammunition after just a few seconds of sustained fire. Following his orders, instead of killing them, he knocked them out just so he could interrogate them later. His companions followed suit, unharmed. As they moved towards the bridge, the same scene repeated itself over and over, with adolescents, most of them barely 16 or 15 years old, being the bulk of the stubborn defenders trying to get them off their rusty, barely functional ship. Few were those past 18, and fewer still were the odd kids no older than 12 joining the defenders. After the sixth encounter, and now ready to storm the bridge, Milcades knew something was terribly wrong with the ship. With a low-yield breaching charge, the worn bulkhead keeping the bridge locked away was destroyed. Milcades moved in expecting to be immediately shot at, but instead found a trio of adults protecting. "Captain Milcades, we have a bit of a situation here," came the voice of Francesco, gruff and with a notable bass to it. "I'm aware. We've captured the bridge. Do not kill the prisoners if you can. Secure the rest of the vessel," Milcades ordered through his comms before addressing the group of pirates in front of him. "Surrender." With no other options at their disposal, the three leaders kneeled and put their hands behind their heads. His princess would have many questions, he was certain of it. Although the first official mission of the composters had been underwhelming, Wyatt was thankful that no danger lurked anywhere near the pirate vessel. After confirming that the planetoid was devoid of any marking or signals that could indicate a hidden base of operations, he reported back only for Commander Redford to recall them, as the boarding operation had been, in his own words, disgustingly one-sided. When his squadron landed, the last thing he expected was to see Captain Milcades waiting for him. Silence reigned between the two until they arrived at one of the large storage bays where he encountered dozens of children and several adolescents huddled together under the careful watch of several Marines and auxilia troops. Wyatt glared and sneered, disgusted at the sight of the prisoners wearing little better than torn rags and poorly patched armor, suits, and clothes. "Children?" he asked loud enough only for Milcades to hear him as they walked past the prisoners. The freighter was full of children and adolescents. Very few can even qualify as adults, and the adults are being interrogated by Princess Clara herself, Milcades replied, stoic and direct. "That doesn't make sense. Even for pirates, sending out a bunch of children with barely any supervision sounds like madness," the pilot asked, as he once again glared at the prisoners. Their eyes reflected fear and hatred toward the men and women guarding them. "My thoughts exactly," Milcades agreed. "Their databases were empty. All we have is a jump log. They've been traveling for a month. Their starting jump point is from a system called Zint at the edges of Renshine territory. They stopped here to undergo emergency repairs. Their warp drive only had enough fuel to do another jump and were getting desperate." Wyatt frowned, regretting choosing to blow up the vessel without a second thought. "So they were escaping from something?" "We don't know. Come, Wyatt Staples, our princess waits for us." Milcades said and continued to guide Wyatt to the other side of the storage area. Behind stacked boxes, he found Commander Redford, Cynthia, and Clara standing before three kneeling adults, 2 men and 1 woman, with illegal cybernetic augmentations visible through their gray eyes, a mechanical jaw, and the woman that had replaced her legs with cybernetic ones. All 3 of them were visibly afraid, but their hatred toward the nobles in front of them was greater. Curiously, he noticed that, despite their blatant disrespect, Cynthia didn't appear ready to take their heads. "We are here, my princess," Milcades announced as he took Cynthia's left side, and Wyatt stood close to Clara, filling the gap provided by Redford. Clara nodded once, and Wyatt felt a now familiar shiver run down his spine when he felt the cold, calculative, near emotionless aura surrounding the princess. "I will ask again. Tell us who you are and why you are here. Do not test my clemency." Wyatt heard the man with the metal jaw growl like the rabid, unwashed animal that he was before he noticed something about their peculiar spot of interrogation. A quick glance to his left revealed that while they were hidden from prying eyes, their angle allowed them to see the other prisoners. They were also far away enough that only shouting at the top of their lungs would let anyone else hear their conversation. His attention shifted back to the 3 adults when he heard one of them spit at Clara. Reacting on instinct, he raised his right hand fast enough to block the spittle from impacting Clara's face. "Try to do something like that again and I'll order the death of one of your children. Do not test me further," Clara said once Wyatt lowered his arm. "You're going to kill us anyway, Aster bitch. We're not telling you anything," the woman barked back. "And yet you surrendered to my forces," Clara pointed out. "I fail to see the logic behind your pointless defiance and bravado." The man who had spit at her answered, "We thought you were normal Navy shit-stains, not a bunch of lapdogs led by one of you fucking tyrants. Would have blown the ship to pieces otherwise." The second man with the metal jaw snapped a bite at the princess, his metallic teeth producing an uncomfortable noise. "We'll die free, away from the clutches of the principality." "Strong words coming from a pirate," Redford replied as he stared at the pirates with nothing but loathing. It was as if the mere existence of the kneeling trio was an insult to his eyes. "Answer the princess. Who are you and why were you using a rust bucket with barely any fuel left?" "Fuck you, noble trash," the metal jaw man replied. "Why must you test me so?" Clara asked, eyes narrowing. "Captain Milcades is an excellent interrogator, but hardly a gentle one. Do you wish to discover what he, a Royal Marine captain, is capable of doing to you to make you talk?" The 3 prisoners flinched at the proposition, but said nothing. "Answer my questions, and I will see to it that you will be imprisoned fairly and your crew properly tended to." Before the prisoners could argue back, she pressed on with a firmer voice. "Do not force my hand. Cooperate and you won't be harmed. None of you." "How many of us did you kill already when you boarded our ship, bitch?" the spitman asked, glaring death upon the princess. "A loyal dog of the principality can't be trusted. A noble only speaks lies. An Aster only drools poison. When someone doesn't want to live wearing the collar you have fashioned for us since birth, you kill them. Take your lies and choke on them." "This is getting us nowhere, my princess," Cynthia finally made her voice known. "These impudent beasts must be taught a lesson in obedience. Allow me to be their teacher." "Very well," Clara said, eyes cold and emotionless. "Decapitate 5 of their children, 5 more every time they refuse to answer me." "Demon!" the woman cried out as the 2 men fumed in anger. "You're no one to use the lives of others like so much trash." "I'm Clara Aster, 2nd Princess of the Astorian Principality. Nothing is beyond my reach," she said, nodding at Cynthia, who then unsheathed her sword and began to walk over to the young prisoners. She only made it 2 steps before the metal jaw man exclaimed, "Wait!" and Clara raised a hand, stopping her bodyguard mid-step. "Yes?" The man looked at his companions for several long, silent seconds until they dropped their heads in defeat. Will you spare the babies?" "Babies? Did they bring babies with them? Forget desperation. Whatever happened to them left them no other choice. Did a rival pirate gang or a syndicate try to destroy them?" Wyatt thought, surprised by the new information, and his glare softened. "As I've promised, they will not be harmed, as long as you answer my questions." Clara remarked, and waited for 3 seconds before continuing. Speak. W- we're part of the Dominator Syndicate. A little over a month ago, we got attacked by Drazen raiders. We fought back, but they were too strong. Caught us by surprise. Before the boss's ship was destroyed, we took everything we could and fled, scattering in several directions. We don't know who else made it out, but our ship, as you can see, was chosen to carry out as many children, adolescents, and babies as we could before our home could be overrun, the man confessed. Drazen, Wyatt hissed the word with hatred. Do you believe that will garner you any sympathy from us? Redford asked. Drazen raiders attack anyone they expect to win against, a monster killing another monster. In my opinion, that makes the duties carried by the Royal Navy easier, pirate scum. Damn dog, the woman cried out. You heartless animal. I wonder where you got your eyes from, Redford countered, glaring death upon the woman. Did you at least wait until the one you stole them from died? Enough, Redford, Clara ordered, and the older man obeyed, though he didn't stop glaring at the bound prisoners. Where were you attacked? In the Ostenmark system, the metal jaw man replied. So you had no plans of attacking weak stations for supplies? What were you trying to achieve with these teens and children? Clara asked. The Spitman tried to kill the princess with his glare alone as he replied. We were going to attack the stations here, take any fuel and equipment they had and jump to the Hastrung system. There's a pirate den there, hidden. We hope to get refuge there, away from the Drazen and away from you, principality whores. I wonder how many innocent people you'd happily kill to get those resources, Wyatt asked, mirroring the snide remark the Spitman had made previously, whatever sympathy he gained for them when they mentioned the Drazen was gone after their revelation. Fuck you, Aster Lapdog, the Spitman replied before returning his attention to the princess. As for you, that's all we know. You can torture us if you want, but there's nothing more we can tell you, tyrant. Cynthia's eyes glowed for a moment, and the next 6 Marines guarding the other prisoners made their way to them, saluting once they were a few meters away from their princess. Take them away, put them in the brig, lock them up, and bring them a meal, Clara ordered. She closed her eyes for a moment, and suddenly several staff members pushing grav carts entered the storage room. As the 3 adults were dragged away by the Marines, the woman cried out, What will you do to our babies? They are being inoculated, treated, and fed. That's all you need to know. My promise shall be kept, Clara replied, turning away from the trio. Redford, Wyatt, a moment if you will. Wyatt and Redford obeyed while Milcades and Cynthia followed closely, giving them ample room to talk in peace. Is this about the pirates? Wyatt asked without an ounce of shame or regret in his tone. Indeed, Redford, I can understand your hatred, but you, Wyatt? She asked as they approached the children and teenagers who were being handed out fresh rations. They took it from the hands of the staff members and ate it greedily, but not one of them thanked them for it. Clara, they're pirates, Wyatt replied as if that answered everything while glaring at the prisoners gorging themselves on the food provided to them. You're wasting your mercy on them. Give me 5 minutes and I'll put a bullet in their heads and throw them out to space myself. Clara frowned but didn't admonish him for his answer. Where does this hatred come from, Wyatt? While I would have worded my thoughts in a more refined manner, Clara, I too share Wyatt's sentiment, Redford replied, calling her by her name, indicating this was a serious personal matter. Throughout the majority of my career in the Royal Navy, the enemy I've faced the most have been pirates, be them single-ship raiders, groups and gangs, or entire syndicates. To show them mercy is folly. Redford paused for a moment to look at the prisoners, then continued. I must admit that my decision was rushed and derived from personal experiences, but I don't regret it. By their own admission, they were planning to attack the poorly defended stations here, steal everything they could get their hands on, and likely kill everyone stationed in them. Pirates are cowards who only prey on the weak and undefended. They may pretend to be freedom fighters, but they're nothing more than terrorists, anarchists, murderers, criminals, pillagers, and slavers. The fact that they are human is the sole reason they are a step above the Drazen, but even then I question it. They are dangerous, irredeemable, and must be dealt with accordingly. And they are a threat created by the principality itself. I'm not judging your lack of compassion, both of you. I am merely saying that, had I followed your suggestion, we would be ignorant of this possible threat. Trust me, I am not feeding them out of the goodness of my heart. Once we arrive at Balakura, I'm handing every prisoner to the local authorities, and they will be dealt with by them. The mercy I've displayed is shown toward the babies who are innocent in all of this. They still live for this reason alone. Redford sighed. Clara, you can't blame the principality for their existence. Even the most controlling or idyllic government to exist will have to deal with people who go against it and wish to see it burn because of their conflicting ideologies. The Arabians, the Imperium, the Chin-Shu commonality, and the Yikanti hierarchy. We all have different forms of government, and yet the pirate threat is prevalent. The only exception would be the Drazen Collective, but their pirates are our problem, not theirs, only due to how their physiology works. But the principality could be better. The Royal Navy, for all its power and splendor, has failed to destroy the pirate threat, and now they will be prolific for as long as this conflict lasts. Clara sighed tiredly. Be that as it may, their blood won't stain my hands. At least, not directly, and if I can help it. I'll let the proper authorities deal with them. This is my command. Of course, my princess, Redford replied. Good. Now, Redford, Galt has informed me that we are ready to proceed. Go, take the helm, and let us continue on our journey. Contact the nearest outpost and give the coordinates of the disabled freighter. It will be theirs to do as they please and tell them to be wary of any odd movements in the system, Clara ordered, and the aged commander gave a salute. As he turned to leave, he patted Wyatt's shoulder twice and gave him a serious smile and a second-long glance. Then he left. Once the older gray-haired man was gone, Clara spoke up. Would you be so callous as to look at them in the eye as you kill them, Wyatt? Yes, came the cold reply from the pilot. Commander Redford is right. There is not a single Navy personnel that doesn't hate the damn pirates, Clara. Look at them. Look at their eyes. Even the youngest among them have nothing but hatred in their eyes. They took their rations and ate them without even thinking they could be poisoned. They're filthy animals that need to die. He paused for a moment. Being attacked by the Drazen is a fate I do not wish even upon them, but I will shed no tears and spare no effort in saving any of them. Please tell me you don't have a horrific close encounter with pirates that made you hate them so, Clara said, almost imploring that she was correct. During my patrol duties, I destroyed a few of their fighters. It was the prisoners that told me everything I needed to know about them. That and the stories of veteran auxilia forces and merchants talking around Woodshaft. Wyatt pointed at the Marines and the auxilia members watching over the prisoners. Look at their faces. The nobles look at them like they're vomit. But the auxilia? If you think I hate them, then you need to look closer, Princess. Look at the faces of true odium. Clara focused on them and found that Wyatt was speaking the truth. If Wyatt's eyes were like flames, then the eyes of the auxilia and even those of the staff personnel were like raging infernos compared to his. A large portion of her auxilia forces were transferred from her brother's fleet, but the rest were made up of Woodshaft recruits. Some had been mere merchants, dock workers, freighter loaders, and maybe militia forces, but the hatred was the same. Seeing that, she wondered how they were able to restrain themselves from just killing every single one of them despite her orders when they boarded their ship. They like to raid weak stations, merchant and civilian ships, lone Navy escorts, and the weak points on colonies. They take what they can, burn the rest, kill indiscriminately, and take as many captives as their pens can hold. They turn them into slaves, working them to death in their mines, farms, and hideouts. The kids and the babies? How many of those do you think were made by consensual partners? Wyatt asked. He knew he was laying it thick, and also that Clara was likely aware of their actions, but he had the sneaking suspicion that she had never been close to a pirate and the reaction they caused. Why would she? She was a princess. Things like pirating were only stories, propaganda, or video recordings at most. To them, I am nothing more than a cruel tyrant. My title, my power, my status, my prestige means nothing to them. I know they would kill me if I were at their mercy. I am not naive to their cruelty. I just never thought it could be like this, Clara replied, her voice distant. I know I am not free of sin, Wyatt. Forget about the adolescence. Would you really be able to bring harm to these innocent children without a second thought? If so, would you also kill the innocent babies? Innocent children? Wyatt asked, turning his head to face Clara. Clara, they're not innocent. Perhaps the youngest among them without a mark. All of them are murderers. The marks on their neck indicate they've killed someone through initiation. They are worse than mindless animals. They're pirates. They may not be Drazen, but the difference is only marked by their species. I won't harm them as long as it is your command, Clara. I vowed to protect the innocent if it is within my power. Ending the miserable life of a worthless pirate is protecting the innocent. But the babies? They are the most innocent of all. They will be protected. Clara nodded once, smiling. She remembered the words spoken by Uriel Holks describing her favorite and personal pilot. He had been right. Wyatt was warm, kind, honest, and direct in everything he did. But now she could understand what Cynthia had seen in him. Wyatt was a cold-blooded, ruthless killer. For him, mercy against the wicked did not exist, but he'd put his life on the line for those he cherished and the innocent. It was hard to see his ruthlessness at full display, but he still displayed the soul of a true knight she'd seen in him. And he knew she had no room to judge him for being ruthless. Turning to him, her smile turned sincere, and her eyes relaxed upon meeting her friend's gaze. That is all I needed to hear, my dear Wyatt. Would you have done it? Carry out your threats? Wyatt asked, also relaxed and curious. She turned to the prisoners once more, but her tone did not change. I do not make idly threats, Wyatt. As you say, they are pirates, and lessons must be learned through force if necessary. I rather not use it if it can be avoided. My actions will not be blinded by reckless emotion. Not again. My princess, Milcady spoke after a few moments of silence. Perhaps we should look into the Drazen menace? They may just be pirates, but allowing the Drazen to gain a foothold could bring dire consequences if left unchecked. I have thought the same, Milcades. However, our duty calls first, and thus House Ferentis awaits. After we secure their cooperation, then my gaze can turn to their threat and decide our next course of action. Return to your duties, the princess explained. If so, since we were interrupted earlier, may I take Wyatt to the firing range? I wish to see his skill with guns myself, Milcades proposed. You may. Wyatt, go with Milcades, Clara ordered, and then moved to leave with Cynthia close to her. Once the two men were alone, Milcades tapped Wyatt's shoulder. Follow me, Lieutenant. Wyatt obeyed and followed the stoic captain. After a few minutes of walking, they reached an elevator leading to a different deck. Then the captain started talking. Heard that Cynthia is going to start training you on using an energy sword. I wish you good luck, Wyatt Staples. Cynthia is quite proficient in that field. I figured that much myself, Wyatt replied as the blender of motion that was Cynthia Winfield passed through his mind again. That memory etched into his memory firmly. Out of curiosity, how good of a marksman do you consider yourself to be? Decent enough, I suppose, Wyatt replied. I've always scored high on my target practice tests. Milcades hummed deeply. We shall see. What weaponry are you most comfortable using? Long, middle, close? As long as I can shoot it, I'm good. Oh, except shotguns. For some reason, I've never used them well. Sometimes they escaped from my grasp, hit myself with the butt, or the recoil made me lose my stance, Wyatt confessed without shame. Milcades didn't reply and didn't speak for the rest of the way until they made it to the rather spacious firing range. It was divided into 10 separate rows. Each one was several meters long with a hanging target dummy at the end of it, featuring a full-sized standing human. There were only 4 rows occupied by Marines, who paid them little mind as they were focused on their practice. Put on your helmet, Milcades ordered, and Wyatt obeyed. Opening a communication channel, he continued. Let's try the standard combat rifle. Pick one. Wyatt turned around to find a huge selection of weapons ranging from handguns, SMGs, rifles of various kinds, shotguns, and even a few laser guns. Picking up a battle rifle, he checked it, grabbed a magazine, and took the nearest row next to Milcades. Taking a familiar stance, he aligned the scope to his target and fired, hitting the dummy in the head, followed by the echoing clang of the bullet hitting its metal target. When Milcades didn't say anything, he kept shooting until his clip was empty. Not a single shot was a miss, and all but 2 of his 30 shots hit the dummy's face, the other 2 hitting its chest. "Now use an SMG middle range," Milcades said, his tone portraying his stoicism. With the press of a button, the target moved closer. Wyatt obeyed, picking up a rapid-fire TY-8T model, standard issue for the Auxilia forces. The aim was poor, but it had a capacity for 70 rounds, and it wasn't bulky. Before he turned around, Milcades spoke again. "Use the grasshopper," he ordered. Wyatt paused for a moment in doubt. The grasshopper was issued to nobles, marines, orbital shock troops, and army officers. He was about to protest that the TY-8T was enough for him, but something stopped him. Glancing at the marines present, he noticed they were watching what he was going to do. "I'm a noble now," he thought as grabbed the grasshopper. The SMG had a longer barrel and was twice as heavy, but with his new strength, he barely felt the difference. Walking up to his row after grabbing 2 clips of ammunition, he studied the gun closer, noticing it had 2 modes, full auto and burst. Putting it against his shoulder, he aimed and opened fire to test it first. Nodding to himself, he fired again in controlled bursts, hitting the dummy's torso most of the time. When the clip was empty of its 50 bullets, he reloaded and switched to burst mode, quickly finding out that the burst mode fired 5 bullets per round. Again, most of his shots were aimed at the torso, but landed a full burst on the target's head. "You have a proclivity to aim for the head, Lieutenant. I approve," Milcades said. "Now try a shotgun." "But I told you that—" "Amuse me," Milcades countered. Unable to deny the Royal Marine, Wyatt grabbed a standard shotgun and loaded only 6 shells in it. He aimed and fired. Predictably, he winced even with his newfound upgrades and nearly let go of his weapon. "You were not exaggerating," Milcades said, his tone carrying a hint of surprise in it. "Forget the shotgun, grab a handgun, use the FVX-35 storm cannon." Again, it was a pistol designed for the exclusive use of nobles, but this time he didn't hesitate. Grabbing it, he picked 2 magazines and went to his row, and to his surprise, Milcades moved the target back to its maximum distance. "Use your eyes! You've been able to avoid focusing on something too much. Now focus on your target intently," said the captain. Wyatt did as ordered and focused on the dummy. After a few seconds of concentration, his vision zoomed in, locking into his target. Somehow, still retaining full control of his peripheral vision and sense of awareness, he loaded the heavy handgun and aimed it. The pistol rang loudly despite the protection of his helmet, but he fired again and again until the 10 bullets were spent. He had to admit the storm cannon was definitely hard to control. The weight of it and its recoil made him flinch and lose his stance the first few shots, but he adapted quickly to it. 8 shots landed on the dummy, with 6 hitting the torso and 2 its head. "Again!" came the command. Wyatt obliged, and this time he did much better, landing 3 shots on the torso and 7 on the head. "Use 2 storm cannons at the same time," came the next command. Again, Wyatt obeyed without delay, and soon he was holding 2 of the elegant but heavy handguns. Aiming again, he fired once, and his shot missed by a wide margin. His stance was off, his balance skewed, and the recoil from both guns knocked his focus out. Retaking his stance, he fired his right first, followed by the left, then the right, and then the left, alternating his shots in quick succession. He adapted to it quickly, managing to control his shots better and not lose his balance and focus. He continued to fire until 10 magazines were spent. "You can stop now, Wyatt Staples. I've learned everything I need to know. You may leave," Milcades ordered, and Wyatt saluted him before leaving, ignoring the Marines that had, for the most part, watched him practice. Alone inside his helmet, Milcades reviewed the score tally he had secretly recorded, and a smile widened across his lips. Accuracy rating, 92%. Headshot proficiency, 61%. A good marksman? Such a joke, Milcades said to himself. Then he left the range.